Welcome to Restitch America, a podcast about restoring civility, strengthening patriotism, and rebuilding unity in America. My name is Ohene-Opare. As an immigrant for nearly 2 decades and a new American citizen, I created this show to help heal our national conversation, to rekindle our pride in our country, and to rebuild our sense of patriotism through optimism, civility, and willful positivity. Now sit, relax, and let's restitch America. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on episode number 5 of Restitch America. My name is Ohene-Opare. I'm very excited to be here with you today. We will begin the show with a new African proverb. And as I was researching for this, I wanted to find something that would hearken to the times we live in today. Prior to sharing the proverb, I want to share with you an article that I dropped in the Daily Wire this week. And I don't know if I've talked about this, but recently I had the opportunity to start writing for the Daily Wire. And the way that entire opportunity came about, I think, is very interesting. And I'll share a little bit of that story as we go through the program today. This week's article was titled, How Storytelling Can Save Conservatism. So I'm going to expound a little bit on that today. The proverb for today is from Nigeria, and it's by a Nigerian novelist, Ben Okri. And this is what he said about storytelling. To poison a nation, poison its stories. A demoralized nation tells demoralized stories to itself. Beware of the storytellers who are not fully conscious of the importance of their gifts and who are irresponsible in the application of their art. Now, when I found that quote, I thought it was really profound. Now, over the last couple of decades since I came to America, I have seen a palpable effort to poison America's stories. And this is quite unfortunate. Long before I came to America, there were narratives about America that I had heard all the way back in West Africa. And many of those narratives, I did not have any way to debunk or disprove. And it created a certain perception of America that I had to encounter and had to deal with when I came here. One lucky factor for me was because my parents had been here, and because of that, they could give me their firsthand experience, and that was certainly a better way to truly understand the opportunities that were here. One such narrative that I heard when I was back in Ghana was the fact that there was a political party in the US that did not like people like me. And so I remember in the year 2000 when Bush was running against Gore, I was one of those guys all the way in Africa who was hoping and praying that Al Gore would win. And I did not really understand anything about political ideology or anything like that. But the narrative that if Bush came into power, somehow immigration will be curtailed was something that bothered me at the time. And so I wanted Gore to win because I thought if he won, then I would have the opportunity to come to America. And the funny thing is, he did not win. I came to America, and the rest is history. So these narratives actually have an effect on people who are not even in the country, let alone the people who are here. And since I've been here, I've heard so many narratives about the founding of America. And one of the most egregious ones is the one recently released a couple of years ago, which was the 1619 Project, which had a goal of redefining America's founding. And so instead of speaking about America as a country that was founded on freedom and self-determination, they wanted to redefine the founding to say America was founded on white supremacy and racism. So to poison a nation, you poison its stories. We take the history of the nation, we adulterate the stories, we turn them around, and that's the way you demoralize the population. So there are so many kids today growing up who do not have the same kind of warmth that I have when I think about America. They don't have the same kind of excitement when they think about being born here. It's almost like a sense of shame comes over them when they think about the country because our nation's stories have been poisoned. And the second part of the quote is, a demoralized nation tells demoralized stories to itself. And so when you look at the way that pundits talk about America, you hear that demoralization. It's almost like the feeling of, let's sit down and shut up. It's not our place to speak up. We are the instigators of all the trouble in the world. How dare we say something here? And I remember when Obama took office, one of the first things he did is he went around the world and basically apologized for America. A nation with its stories poisoned feels like we are responsible for the damage in the world. Now, I'm not trying to assert that we haven't made any mistake. That's not what I'm trying to do. However, poisoning a nation's history with lies, with the express goal of demoralizing its citizens, I believe is a conspiracy without conspirators. And this is what I mean by that. There seems to be some kind of concerted effort to denigrate either the founding of the country, but not only that, but to also denigrate everything that the country has gone through. And as part of that, what we do is we highlight the negatives to the detriment of any of the positives. So for instance, if we talk about race relations in America, we talk about all the atrocities, but never talk about the transformation that has happened, such that we come back here to the year 2022, and you have people who are telling us that basically we haven't made any progress. We have a history that is fraught. However, we have been working over the last century to right the wrongs of the past. We need to begin to tell the stories of our redemption. We need to begin to tell the stories of how far we've come. We need to amplify the voices of people who want to share stories that uplift us rather than demoralize us. And we need to get those stories into the minds and hearts and ears of our little ones, our youth, so we can infuse in them a patriotism that cannot be stolen by the poison that has been poured into our conversations. Our African Proverb segment today is brought to you by KeepMyFollowers.com. Keep My Followers is a platform I built a few months ago to push back against big tech and social media censorship. It is mainly for creators and influencers who don't want to lose access to their follower community due to banning, account suspension, or outright cancellation. KeepMyFollowers.com separates your content from your followers, so in the event of censorship, you can still reach your followers by email. It takes less than 5 minutes to set up your profile, and your followers can begin following you immediately after that. Please help support this show by checking out KeepMyFollowers.com and help us protect free speech in America. In my article in the Daily Wire, I focused a little bit on how we can leverage storytelling as a tool. I want to read a little bit from the article for those of you who don't have a Daily Wire subscription. I want to share a little bit of it with you so you can kind of get a sense of the point I was trying to make. Our country today is a tale of dueling stories and narratives being spun by powerful forces and interest groups with agendas that may not necessarily be in the best interest of we the people. Unfortunately, like the song of the Pied Piper, these narratives, which appear to have a numbing and hypnotizing effect, have succeeded in capturing the minds of our fellow citizens, driving many of them obliviously towards mediocrity, self-destruction, and doom. As an immigrant with an outsider's perspective on many of these narratives, I have often wondered what, if anything, can be done, especially when it seems the most destructive narratives are winning in the court of public opinion. Even more damaging are the narratives that appear purposefully engineered to target our children. Narratives about gender and sexuality that run counter to millennia-old norms and biological reality are now being promulgated within the walls of academia and at institutions supposedly dedicated to the conduct of rigorous scientific research. What's worse is the fact that those courageous enough to challenge these narratives are seen and treated as though they were dissidents of a fascistic regime that demands a total subjugation of one's intellect to the propagation of sanctioned talking points from which no deviation is permitted. Now, I go on to talk about institutions that have basically been captured. Now, we know Hollywood was always contrarian and trying to kind of buck the culture. And so we understand that. However, recently it seems like other institutions dedicated to storytelling, like Disney, like Hallmark, institutions that we could trust to tell the kinds of stories that reflect who we truly are. Today, it seems like those institutions have also fallen victim and converted to the religion of wokeism, I guess. And somehow they're out to prove their allegiance to that religion by embracing destructive doctrines and sacraments. Now think about all the changes that we're seeing going on in our society. It feels like water running downhill and there's nothing we can do to stop it. And it can be quite demoralizing. When you are demoralized, you feel burdened. And the goal of storytellers is to remove that burden and to allow people the freedom to freely dream. I believe we can use storytelling as a way to lift each other up and to lighten each other's burdens so that we can begin to visualize a better future for us and our children. So, how do we as conservatives begin to conserve immutable truths about human nature, biology, or science in general? How do we conserve truths about America's founding and its place in the world? How do we break out of the labels that have been placed on us to shackle us? And how do we fight back without becoming purveyors of similarly damaging narratives about those who disagree with us? I conclude the article by saying there's no silver bullet here. I wish there was one. I wish I could wave a wand and summon sanity back into the public square. Unfortunately, I think that's the wrong approach. We're not going to wake up one day and suddenly everybody sees things the way we do. We're not going to wake up one day and suddenly the narratives have changed. In order to change the narratives, we have to engage in the storytelling necessary to change those narratives. And that's the beginning. Now, there are people like me who have taken it upon ourselves to be pundits and to create podcasts and to speak out. And that's good. However, each and every one of us who see ourselves as listeners also need to recognize that we have a responsibility to speak up about the things that we know and believe. And I'm looking forward to be part of that new narrative. That's my goal here with all this. And I hope that my platform can be amplified in such a way that we can begin to get these stories out. Tying it all back to the quote we started with, to poison a nation, poison its stories. America's stories are being poisoned. We have the antidote. The antidote is to tell the other side of the story. The antidote is to share our perspective. The antidote is to no longer be silent. The antidote is to know who we are. When I think of conservatism, I ask myself, what exactly are we fighting for? What are we doing? What is our goal? Who are we working for? The only thing I can think about is this. True conservatism is an ideology that is completely dedicated to helping people reach their full potential. And all the principles and tenets of conservatism support that goal. And so we need to actively engage the next generation to help them understand, one, what that potential looks like, and to give them that glimpse in a way that inspires them and motivates them to want to take up a torch and say, I belong in this fight. I've always believed the worst thing you can do to a person is to hide from them their potential. We need to begin to reveal the potential to our children through our stories and through taking back our narrative, because our future generations matter. They really do. And that's my message for today. All right, so let's move now to our news of the day, our Culture Wars segment. On Friday, Elon Musk did something that I think is taking back the narrative again. I love what he did because it is doing exactly what I'm talking about. And he did it at a huge personal cost. He spent $44 billion to reveal what was happening behind the scenes of what is currently our de facto public square. And the revelations were very interesting. And I know there are more to come, but I wanted to start to discuss some of those revelations because I saw a few things that I thought other people have not addressed as much. So I want to bring that out. To begin, I just want to give you a gist of the whole thing. This is something we all knew was happening. You know, we knew Twitter was censoring people. We knew people's accounts were being banned for no apparent reason. We know about the Hunter Biden laptop and how that was completely suppressed on Twitter and on other social media platforms without any coherent reason for why it was done. They claimed it was because of a hacking policy. However, we know on Twitter, Trump's taxes have been leaked and have been posted on Twitter. So many other things have been revealed on Twitter that were probably fruits of nefarious actions. And those have been allowed because they've been reported by mainstream media outlets. However, here's the case where they decided, oh, this was so dangerous because it was going to hurt Joe Biden that they decided to suppress it under the claim of their hacked materials policy. And they knew, and this is what the Twitter files revealed, they knew that they were on shaky ground. It wasn't like they were oblivious to the fact that what they were doing was unprecedented. They knew it. One of the things that was my goal when I started this podcast was to restitch America. And what that means is I cannot assume that only one side of the cloth of America, our social fabric, can come together to kind of restitch itself, right? We need to bring both sides together. And so as I was listening to the story, one thing that jumped out to me was the message that was sent by Representative Ro Khanna, who is a representative from California. I wanted to highlight that because even though most of the Democrats actually today are embracing censorship under the guise of this idea of cracking down on misinformation and disinformation, he stood up. He didn't come out publicly to say it. I wish he had done that. But when nobody was watching, he was willing to go into, the echo chamber and be contrary and to say something against what they were doing. So I'm going to read to you the message that he sent to the Twitter team when he heard the story of the censorship of the laptop. This is what he said. Hope you're well, Vijaya, but this seems a violation of the First Amendment principles. If there is a hack of classified information or other information that could expose a serious war crime and the New York Times was to publish it, I think the New York Times should have that right. A journalist should not be held accountable for the illegal actions of the source unless they actively aided the hack. So to restrict the distribution of that material, especially regarding a presidential candidate, seems not in keeping with the principles of New York Times versus Sullivan. I say this as a total Biden partisan and convinced he didn't do anything wrong. But the story now has become more about censorship than relatively innocuous emails, and it's become a bigger deal than it would have been. So I commend Representative Ro Khanna for standing up for the principles of freedom of speech. Now, I know that the First Amendment and our right to freedom of speech is basically a right to not be stifled by the government. So I understand that Twitter is a private company and they can have different rules and regulations about that. However, we expect our institutions that have become our de facto public square to uphold the principles of our Constitution, even if they're not legally required to. And that is what I think Ro Khanna was talking about here, where he's saying you are violating the principles of the First Amendment. And I just wanted to, express my gratitude. I may not agree with him on certain things, but I think when we do see people on the other side doing things that we know to be true, it is important for us to acknowledge and let people understand that we do have a lot in common. The part of this story that completely baffles me is about the media reaction to these revelations. Now, I grew up in a country that did not always have freedom of speech. There was a criminal libel law up until the year 2000 in my country. And what that meant was when you said something in public, you were not just under potential threat for libel in a civil court, you were actually under threat for libel in a criminal court. So you could actually go to jail for saying something the government deemed unacceptable. And there were journalists that went to jail because they said something that was not sanctioned by the government. And so to come to a country and to see our journalists who are supposed to be the watchdogs, who are supposed to be the ones that go into the rooms where the average citizen cannot go, to come back and tell us what's happening behind the scenes. It is mind-boggling to see them all over the place denigrating the reporter, Matt Taibbi, who reported on this news. It is just mind-boggling that we have journalistic institutions who have made themselves arbiters of what is true and what is not, and have began to filter through important information that should come to the American people to determine whether we need to hear it or not. Imagine that Elon Musk didn't buy Twitter. There are journalists who knew about this collusion between the democratic apparatus and big tech, and they were willing to be silent about it because it fed into their own narratives. Think about that. I think it's shameful. And that is why voices like mine and others are really important, because we cannot assume that people who are bringing us the news through the mainstream channels care about actually telling us what is happening. They are making determinations every day as to what we need to hear. And so when you listen to the news and you feel outraged, you should ask yourself, am I being manipulated? Is this what is truly happening? When we think about the pressure on our kids and all the things that they're going through and the anxiety and the depression and all those things that are happening. The question is that being engineered because of the narratives that we're telling our children? And to see a media so beholden to a narrative to the detriment of their own journalistic ethics, it's a sad tale. And I hope that we can leverage the technology that we have to amplify voices that are going to challenge these narratives. And I hope that in the next 10 years, or maybe it takes a little longer, topple that regime so that the average citizen can get access to the data that they need to understand what is going on in their country and to understand what role they can play to make changes that are necessary. And the funny thing is, we look at China and we look at North Korea and we bristle and we clutch our pearls and we say, oh, we're not like them, right? They control what their citizens can see. The funny thing is, we're exactly fast becoming like them. And the sooner we realize it, the better. Because you know what? In China, the citizens know that the information they're getting is filtered. They know that. In North Korea, the citizens know that. In Iran, the citizens know that. But in America, we pretend that the information is clean and clear and fair. We need to get away from those illusions and recognize that most of the media is not on our side. Maybe we can summarize this into what I call the art of storytelling. And as I thought about it, I came up with 4 things that we have to do in order to be good storytellers. 1, we have to recognize the existing narrative. We have to recognize that we're living in a world that is driven by narrative. And we have to recognize that that narrative is engineered to get us to feel a certain way, to get us to think a certain way, and to get us to do or not do certain things. So that's the first thing, is to recognize the existing narrative. Number 2, we need to come to terms with our own values. You need to understand, why are you conservative? Why are you liberal? What is the basis of that ideology? And we need to come to terms with those values in a way that equips us with the tools necessary to go into the world to tell the stories that need to be told. And then number 3, we need to love and embrace our audience. You cannot go into the world and make a difference by denigrating half of the people that you need to convert. And so you need to put down the arrogance, put down the ego, put down the desire to own the other side, and truly love and embrace your potential audience. Last week when I posted my last episode, I got a message from a friend of mine, and his comment was that he thought the podcast was awesome and everything, but he said something that caught my eye. He said, "This podcast seems to be so well produced." Now, I got a hint of sarcasm in his message there. And so I reached out and I said, "What do you mean it's so well produced?" And he told me that he felt like it seemed so perfect. It seemed like everything was just buttoned up and he wanted to see a little bit of vulnerability and so on and so forth. And I said to him, I get that, this idea of authenticity and so on and so forth. And I understand that sentiment. However, I am doing something very deliberate here. And what that is I am following that final step of being able to tell our stories, which is speak so you're not misunderstood. There are too many of us who are just willing to jump on, a camera and say stuff without thinking about, whether it adds or takes away from the value of our public square. I don't want to speak emotionally just to get a certain response. I want to get the right response because my goal in speaking is not just to get my voice out there. My goal in speaking is to actually make a difference. And if I want to make a difference, then I have to calculate what I'm saying to actually achieve its intended goal. Here, you just got a little bit of vulnerability from me. So this is all you're going to get. But I don't want it to include a lot of distractions that take away from the message that I want to convey. So thank you for indulging me in that. And I hope you're enjoying it as it is. And as I always say, it's going to get better over time. And so just stick with me as I get better at this. Let's move on to the final part of our episode today, which is our Ask Me Anything or Challenge section. And our challenge today is to begin our baby steps for improving the narrative and contributing our narrative to the world. And so one of the ways that we can do that, I believe, is to go into the world and start putting positivity into the world. And the way we do that is through compliment. So my challenge for you this week is to show your appreciation by sharing sincere compliments. However, it's not going to be a challenge because it's easy to compliment people who you like. So the challenge this week is to actually go and find somebody, and I exemplified that in my compliments of Rokana. Go find somebody you may not normally agree with and see if you can find a genuine compliment to give to that person. Now that's a challenge, right? That's a challenge. So, and I want to hear about it. So go out, and this requires a little bit of action, right? It's not going to be easy to find somebody because we surround ourselves all the time with people who like us and agree with us. So your challenge is to find somebody that you may not agree with and see if you can find something that you can compliment them on, and then share your experience with us. And the way you do that is to write to us at contact@restitchamerica.com, and we will pick a few from what we receive and probably share it next week. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please like and follow us on social media. Please subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends and family. This is the only way we're going to grow. This is the way to amplify the voices of people like me. And I am grateful for all the help and support I'm getting from you. Thank you, and we will see you next week.